Today we're at Halibut Point up in Rockport, Mass, doing a painting of a quarry that's been here for a number of years. It's called Halibut Point, and the only inhabitants now of this quarry are the seagulls you see perched on the rocks. But it's a great destination for painters, and I'm going to talk about edges today. Edges and how we create a variety of edges with watercolor. So my motif is some of the rock faces that you see at Halibut Point. The rock has clearly been quarried. You see the lines and cracks that remain from the breaking of the rock and the carrying away of the rock. It creates for compositions. There's just a lot of opportunities for creating interesting motifs. I'm interested in creating a variety of edges. Some of the edges are going to be very hard. Working on dry paper now, so I'm getting some strong edges that present some of these broken planes in the rocks. And I'll be combining some soft edges below in the water and in the sky. Some rough edges, which are created by taking advantage of the rough paper that I'm using, again in the foliage against the sky and in some of the rocks. And we do this in different ways. There's a small tutorial on my YouTube video account that shows technically how we create these different types of edges. But basically it has to do with the condition of the paper. Is the paper very dry, or is it wet, or is it semi-wet? And the condition of your brush. Does it have a lot of juicy liquid in there, or is it rather dry? In this case, I'm working on dry paper. I'm interested in hard edges, sharp edges. So I'm working on dry paper with a fully loaded brush. I want to get some thick color on there without many broken edges in these shapes that I'm painting now. Later on, where I want a rougher edge, then I'll take a lot of the liquid that's in my brush and I'll blot it off. I'll go to the side of the paper and take out some of that, or use my fingers to draw out some of the liquid. Anyway, what I'm doing now is using that fuller brush to get a variation in grays. I like first of all, it was a gray day. Second of all, these rocks have really interesting color patterns in them. As you look at them, they unfold. On first glance, it looks just like a simple gray, but the more you look at it, the more you see variety in these grays. Now you can watch me creating some rough edges. Still dry paper, but my brush has very little liquid in it, and you can see at the top of this foliage how I'm getting very rough edges because as I go higher in the trees, my brush runs out of paint, and I just am scraping the remainder of the paint with a brush onto the paper. It actually makes a sound something like sandpaper, so it's a lot of people cringe when I do this because it's hard on the brushes, but I don't know any other way to get such a marvelous effect. So I keep a few brushes just for that purpose of doing dry brush technique. Changing the green as I go, someplace more black, someplace blue, someplace yellow, someplace more brown, and adding color now to a wet area so that it stays, so I can create shadows that are soft. Well, that's another edge that I'm using here. While the paper is very damp with pigment, I add a darker color, and you can see it blends in rather naturally with soft edges. So I'm taking advantage of that condition to create darks with soft edges. Into the water, and I'm starting with a big wash of just a very mid-tone gray. Not much character to this gray, but as I start to add the reflections to this gray, I'll try to vary the color. It's a steel gray made up of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. So as it dries, it'll separate a little bit, as it has on the rocks. And I'm starting to create, I'm working now We would call this dry into wet, where the surface of the paper is just painted. It's very wet, but I'm working in with a pretty dry brush, meaning I have pigment on there, but the brush itself does not have much liquid. So that's why the marks are not moving a lot. They have soft edges, but the pigment is not drifting down. If I were using a brush that had a lot of watery liquid in it, these marks would be running downhill because my board is at an angle. But instead, it's staying where I'm putting them for the most part, spreading out a little bit to give me some soft edges. And it gives me time to kind of shape the reflection the way that I would like it to be. So I'm adding darks here and there. I'll do some lifting. I'll add a few more colors and stay in this wet area, finishing the reflection to the degree that I'm happy, and then I'll move on. And it's a little hard to notice in the video, but there's a number of colors that I'm adding. I'm returning to the base of the rocks and adding almost a pure neutral tint, a very sharp edge. This will appear more as the painting dries. You can see now the surface is dried. It's a little more clear, the colors that were used. Close in tonality, but because the edges are soft, they all kind of merge together. I'm touching up the rock surface with some dry brush, adding some rougher edges where I want to highlight, adding a feeling of texture to the rock with this dry brush. The color itself is a light gray made up of the same colors, but added to give texture. Now you see me returning to that same painted area. I'm darkening the color to blend it in a little more and kind of settle this area. I felt it was jumping out a little bit too much, and I wanted it to blend in with the background of trees just a little more. Some light color to the sky, and fixing some smaller areas. I'll return and add some more texture to the rocks, some stronger lines, some deeper marks. And what I'm doing now is just softening the foreground. I'm returning with a light flat brush and softening that foreground. I felt it too was a little jumpy. I want to get more focal attention to this place in the background. It's about halfway up the painting and to the left where you see the little white heads of the seagulls. This is my stage, as it were. I want there to be a lot of attention there because I'm going to put a few gulls there and a few more details. And I think this is the area where I want more focal attention. The rocks are doing a good job. The foliage, the reflection is basically sitting down the way I want it to. But I'm going to be adding detail to the seagulls. Very small, but this is their rock. This is where they seem to like to hang out. I'm even going to add a couple flying through to create a feeling of a group that is gathered on this edge, and create a little drama as well. I'll stay in this section until I feel it's saying what I want it to say, and then perhaps I'll mute some other areas so that I get a little more attention in this corner. Simple painting color-wise, most of this painting is focused on edges. Sharp edges, soft edges, rough edges. The paint that I'm using to finish these gulls has a bit of white into it so that I can fix the details. And now you can see the finished piece. The foreground is nice and quiet. There's a nice focal point in the gulls that are flying through the scene and the reflection. And this last gull that's being reflected into the water was not intended from the beginning, but I started to see it as I finished up the lower section of the rock, and I think it brings nice animated quality to the painting. It's a darker painting. It was a dark day, but using that to tell the story of a kind of wet, dark day and a feeling of sharp edges and soft edges and reflected edges in the water. And that's it.